Caressa had always been different from her people. The Viric were an ancient alien species, fierce warriors, known for their intimidating appearance and unyielding strength. To them, beauty was defined by power, the sharpness of features, and the unrelenting force in their eyes. But Caressa, born with a large scar across the left side of her face, had always felt like an outsider. She was told, since she could remember, that she was ugly, that she didn't meet the standards of her kind. To her people, she was a reminder of weakness, of vulnerability, traits that the Viric could not afford. Caressa spent her youth trying to hide her scars, always ensuring that her face was shadowed, her eyes lowered in submission. She didn't want anyone to look at her for too long, especially not the others in her clan. She feared their judgment, their disdain. They never said it aloud, but their eyes spoke volumes. And when she did speak to them, their silence was more deafening than any insult. She was ugly. That much she knew. Her mission had been assigned when she was still very young, a mission to infiltrate human colonies, to learn about their technology and culture, and perhaps most importantly, to assess whether they posed a threat to her people. It was a task assigned to only the most capable of Viric warriors, and despite Caressa's physical appearance, she had been chosen. Her strength, her ability to withstand pain, her keen intellect, all of these were qualities her people had admired, but her beauty, or lack thereof, was a constant weight she carried. The human colony she was assigned to observe was on the edge of Viric territory, a small outpost that had no idea of the alien presence among them. From the safety of a rocky cliff, Caressa would watch them every day, studying their routines, their behaviors, and their weaknesses. But it was never the technology that fascinated her. It was the humans themselves. They seemed different. Their emotions were raw, unguarded, unlike the controlled, almost emotionless demeanor of the Viric. And there was one human who caught her attention every time. His name was Jason. A young technician, he was responsible for the maintenance of the outpost's equipment. He wasn't particularly tall or imposing, but there was something in his eyes, something Caressa couldn't put her finger on. He had a quiet kindness to him, something rare even among her people, and it intrigued her. She found herself watching him more than anyone else. She often watched him as he worked, fixing machines, adjusting settings, and chatting with other humans. He always smiled, even on the worst days. His colleagues liked him, and Caressa could understand why. He had a warmth that drew people in, a presence that made everything seem more bearable. On one particular afternoon, Caressa was positioned in her usual spot, hidden by the large rock formation overlooking the human compound. It was the middle of the day, and Jason was walking along a path carrying a box of tools. She couldn't help but watch him. There was something different about the way he moved, the way he carried himself. He didn't walk with the purposeful strides of a warrior. Instead, his steps were slower, measured, almost as if he was at peace with himself and his surroundings. As he walked, he glanced up, as if sensing something, though he couldn't possibly know she was there. His eyes met hers for a fleeting moment, and for the briefest of seconds Caressa felt something stir within her. She quickly averted her gaze, but her heart pounded in her chest as though he had seen right through her. For the next few days, Caressa tried to shake the feeling that had blossomed within her. It was foolish to feel anything for a human, especially one so normal. But she couldn't ignore the way he made her feel when their paths crossed, even by accident. There was a warmth to him, a gentleness that Caressa had never experienced from anyone in her own species. It was on the 5th day after their first encounter that Caressa found herself in an unexpected position. She had been watching Jason from behind the rocks as usual, but this time he wasn't working. Instead, he was sitting by a small campfire near the edge of the compound, his eyes focused on the flames as if lost in thought. Caressa debated with herself. Should she leave? Should she stay and observe him like always? It wasn't part of her mission to engage with humans, especially not like this, but she couldn't help it. There was something pulling her toward him, and before she knew it, her feet were moving. silently approaching the campfire. Jason didn't notice her at first. He was too absorbed in the fire. But as Caressa stepped closer, she noticed something. There was no fear in his eyes when he finally looked up at her. No hesitation, no shock. Just a quiet acknowledgement, as if her presence was nothing out of the ordinary. "Hello," Jason said, his voice calm and warm. Caressa froze. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. This wasn't what she had expected. She had thought he would be afraid of her, that he would see her alien features and back away in fear. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled at her, as though she were any other person. She didn't understand it. "Hello," she managed to reply, her voice softer than she intended. Jason patted the ground beside him. "Sit down," he said. "It's a good spot to relax. The fire helps me think." Caressa hesitated, unsure of what to do. Should she sit with him? Was this part of her mission? Or was this something else? She hadn't been trained for this kind of interaction. But there was something about the way he spoke, so inviting, so genuine, that made her want to do just that. She took a step forward, then another, until she was sitting beside him. She didn't know what to say, and for a moment there was silence between them. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Caressa couldn't bring herself to look him in the eye, so she stared at the flames, her hands resting on her lap.
"What's your name?" Jason asked after a while, his voice gentle.
Caressa stiffened. She hadn't expected him to ask something so personal. Her name was something the Vierek didn't speak often, for fear of being traced. It was something to be hidden, like her scars, like her vulnerabilities. "I don't have a name," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Not like you." Jason frowned, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean? Everyone has a name." "You just haven't told me yours yet." Caressa shook her head. "Bah, you wouldn't understand." But Jason wasn't one to give up so easily. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes filled with curiosity. "I think I might. You know, everyone has their own struggles." "I'm sure you've got your reasons for saying that, but I'm here to listen if you want to talk." She had never heard someone speak to her like that before. He didn't pity her, didn't look at her with the cold indifference that others often did. He spoke to her as if she were just another person. And that thought, simple as it was enough to make her stomach twist. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The fire flickered between them, casting long shadows in the quiet night. Caressa could feel the warmth from the flames, but she was more aware of the warmth she felt in her chest. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one she couldn't place. Finally, Jason broke the silence. "You know, you're beautiful." She had heard many things in her life, but never anything like that. Beautiful? She couldn't comprehend what he meant. She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery. But all she saw was sincerity. Jason was looking at her with a softness in his eyes, a look she had never received from anyone, not even her own people. Her heart began to race, her mind going blank. Beautiful. No one had ever called her that. She had spent her entire life hiding from her reflection, from the scars that marked her face. And now, this human, this stranger, was telling her she was beautiful? She didn't know how to react. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to hide. But she didn't know how to accept this either. Jason, sensing her hesitation, smiled gently. "I meant it," he said, his voice quiet. "You are." The words echoed in her mind, reverberating through her thoughts like a distant melody. Beautiful. The word lingered in the air, heavy and unexpected, and for the first time in her life, Caressa began to believe it. She didn't say anything in response. Instead, she just stared at him as if she had never seen him before. Perhaps, in a way, she hadn't. For the first time in her life, Caressa realized that maybe she wasn't as ugly as she had always believed. Maybe, just maybe, she was beautiful. Caressa couldn't stop thinking about Jason's words. You're beautiful. The phrase repeated itself over and over in her mind, like a song that wouldn't stop playing. It had been days since that moment by the fire, and yet she still couldn't fully grasp what had happened. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, especially not someone like Jason. He was human, a species that Caressa had always been trained to see as weak, inferior, and now he was the one who had told her she was beautiful. It was hard to understand why his words affected her so deeply. The Viewership, her people, had always praised strength, not kindness. They had no room for self-doubt or emotional vulnerability. She had been raised to think of herself as strong, capable, and unyielding. But somewhere along the way, the harsh words about her appearance had broken her. She had accepted it as truth, that she was not beautiful, that she didn't belong with others. And yet, when Jason said those words, something inside her shifted. Every day, Caressa found herself returning to the spot by the human campfire, though she tried to stay hidden, far enough that Jason wouldn't see her. She didn't want to talk to him again, not just yet. She was afraid of what his words might mean, afraid of what they might do to her. Could she really be beautiful? Could anyone, let alone someone from another species, see her that way? Jason continued his work, oblivious to the turmoil swirling inside her. He went about his tasks, fixing equipment and chatting with others, but Caressa noticed how his eyes would often scan the horizon, almost as if looking for something, or someone. She wondered if he was thinking about her, if he realized that she was always watching from afar. Part of her wanted to approach him, but another part of her felt ashamed. She wasn't human. She wasn't like them, and she had no place among them. She had been sent to observe, to learn about their technology, not to make friends. But as days passed, she found herself drawn to him. Something about Jason's presence was calming. He was kind and genuine, not like the cold, distant warriors of her people. She could tell that his thoughts were not consumed by battle or war. He cared about his work, his friends, and the humans around him. He had a quiet strength that was so different from the harshness of the Viewership. Caressa began to wonder, what would it be like to live among people like this? To feel a sense of belonging instead of isolation? One afternoon, Caressa was walking near the outskirts of the camp when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. But it wasn't another Viewership warrior. It was Jason. "Hey!" he greeted her, his voice light and friendly. Caressa froze, not knowing how to react. She hadn't expected him to approach her, especially not so casually. She couldn't help but notice the warmth in his smile, the kindness in his eyes. "Jason," she said, her voice sounding foreign to her own ears. She had never felt nervous around anyone, but now, standing before him, she felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. "I see you around here a lot," he said, glancing at the surroundings. "I thought maybe you were, I don't know, watching over us or something." Caressa felt a twinge of guilt. She had been watching him, yes, but it wasn't just him. She was observing the whole colony, gathering information for her people. But she couldn't bring herself to say that. "I like the view," she said instead, her voice softer than usual. Jason nodded, not pressing further. He seemed to understand. "It's nice here, isn't it? A bit peaceful compared to the rest of the world."
Caressa nodded, though she wasn't sure what to say next.
They stood there for a moment in silence, the wind rustling through the trees. Caressa felt like she should leave, that she shouldn't be standing here with him, but at the same time, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. There was something about him that made her want to stay, and for the first time in her life, Caressa realized that she didn't want to hide. She didn't want to be the person who always stayed in the shadows. After a long pause, Jason spoke again.
"I've been thinking about what you said, you know, about the beautiful part."
She didn't know how to respond. "I didn't mean to say anything strange," she said quickly, afraid she had somehow offended him. Jason shook his head, his smile reassuring. No, it wasn't strange. It caught me off guard. You know, people don't always hear the nice things they should.
I think everyone has something beautiful about them, even if they don't see it themselves.
Carissa wasn't sure how to react to that. She had never thought of herself as beautiful, not even once. Her scars were all she could see, and the scars of her past, the way her people treated her, had made her doubt everything about herself. But Jason was telling her that there was something beautiful about her. She found herself looking into his eyes, unsure of how to respond. I don't think I'm beautiful, she admitted, her voice low. Jason took a step closer, his eyes steady and kind. I think you are, he said simply. His words made her feel something strange, something she couldn't explain. It was as though she was being seen for the first time, not as a warrior, not as a tool of her people, but as someone, as an individual. Carissa didn't know what to say. She wanted to believe him, but she had spent so long believing that she was unworthy of such praise. Her heart ached with a longing she didn't understand. Could it be true? Could she really be beautiful in his eyes? She was afraid of what it meant. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? For the next few days, Carissa stayed away from Jason, keeping to herself. She couldn't shake the way his words had made her feel. Every time she thought about them, she felt a wave of confusion. Part of her wanted to run, to return to her mission and forget about everything that had happened. But another part of her wanted to know more. She wanted to understand why he had said those words to her. What did they mean? And why did she care so much? Meanwhile, Jason continued to work, though Carissa could see that he kept looking in her direction. She wondered if he missed their conversations, or if he even cared at all. Maybe he had already forgotten. But she couldn't forget. The memory of his kindness, his words, had taken root in her heart. It was on the 4th day after their last encounter that Carissa found herself by the campfire again, sitting on the edge of the clearing, staring into the flames. She was lost in thought when she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't need to look to know who it was. It was Jason.
Mind if I join you?
He asked, his voice calm and familiar. Carissa looked up at him, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. She nodded, though she couldn't speak at first. Jason sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Neither of them said anything at first, just sat in silence, watching the fire. But it was a comfortable silence. Carissa felt as though she could breathe a little easier, as if the weight of her thoughts wasn't so heavy when he was around. I've been thinking, Jason said, breaking the silence. About you. Carissa turned to him, surprised. About me? Yeah, Jason said, looking into the fire.
I've been wondering why you're always so distant, why you hide yourself.
You don't have to. You don't need to be afraid of anyone here. I know you're different, but that doesn't mean you don't belong. Carissa's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't used to hearing words like these. They were the words of someone who cared, who didn't see her as a tool or a weapon, but as a person. She felt her throat tighten. I don't know how to stop hiding, she whispered. Jason's gaze softened. Maybe you don't have to stop hiding all at once. Maybe you just need to start letting people in, like you're doing right now. Carissa felt her breath catch. Could it really be that simple? Could she let herself be seen, even with all her flaws? She didn't know. But as she looked into Jason's eyes, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was worth trying. Carissa's mind was in turmoil as she lay awake in her small, isolated room at the human outpost. The events of the past week had shifted something deep within her, and she could no longer ignore the feelings stirring in her heart. Jason's words had echoed in her mind ever since the moment he had told her she was beautiful. It was impossible for her to forget the softness in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice. But she wasn't sure what to make of it. She had always believed that beauty was something to be hidden, something to be ashamed of. But now, for the first time in her life, someone had seen her differently. Jason's kindness had shaken her, and she could feel herself becoming more and more drawn to him. Every time they spoke, she felt something stir inside her, something she couldn't put into words. It was as though he had unlocked a part of her that had been buried for so long. Her humanity, the part of her that was vulnerable, the part that longed for connection. Caressa had been taught to suppress emotions, to bury them deep down so that they would never interfere with her duties as a Viric. Emotions were a weakness, a liability, and Caressa had learned that lesson well. But Jason was different. He made her want to feel. He made her question everything she had been taught. Over the past few days, she had found herself drawn to him more and more. It was almost impossible to avoid him, no matter how hard she tried. Every time she thought she could slip away unnoticed, he seemed to find her. There was no avoiding it anymore. She had to face him, face the feelings he stirred within her, and confront the confusion swirling inside her heart. Caressa had known from the beginning that she was different from the humans, that her mission was to observe them, not to get involved with them. But now, it was no longer about the mission. It wasn't about gathering information or preparing for an invasion. It was about something much more personal, something that she had never expected to experience: connection. The next day, Caressa found herself at the edge of the camp once again, watching the humans as they worked. She had come to think of this place as a refuge, a place where she could observe them without drawing attention to herself. But today, she couldn't stop thinking about Jason. He had become a constant in her thoughts, and it troubled her. She didn't know what to do with these feelings, and she didn't know how to control them. As she watched Jason from a distance, she couldn't help but notice how effortlessly he interacted with the others. He smiled, he laughed, and he seemed so at ease in the world around him. It was something she couldn't quite understand. Her own people were always so serious, so focused on their duty. There was no room for anything other than strength and survival. But Jason, with his kind eyes and warm smile, made it seem as though the world was a place worth embracing, not just enduring. She didn't realize it at first. But before long, Jason had approached her. He had a slight smile on his face, the kind that made her feel both comforted and anxious at the same time. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice light and inviting. Caressa froze. It was the same question he had asked her the last time they spoke. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had been trying to avoid him, but now, here he was, standing before her as if it was the most natural thing in the world.
"I don't mind," she said, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt inside. Jason sat down beside her, close enough that Caressa could feel his presence, but far enough that she still felt a sense of distance.
For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hum of the camp. Caressa could feel her mind racing, her thoughts spinning in every direction. She didn't know what to say, and she wasn't sure if she even knew what she felt anymore. Finally, Jason broke the silence. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his tone soft and understanding. "Is everything okay?" Caressa hesitated before answering. She had to be careful. She had spent so much time pretending to be someone she wasn't, pretending to be someone her people would accept. She didn't want to let herself get too close to Jason, to let him see who she really was. But something inside her made her want to open up, to let him in. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully. "About everything. About who I am, and why I feel the way I do." Jason turned to her, his gaze kind but not intrusive. "You've been thinking about yourself?" he asked gently. "You don't need to be ashamed of that." Caressa looked away, her gaze fixed on the ground.
"I've always been taught that it's wrong to think about myself," she admitted quietly. We don't do that where I'm from. It's not allowed." Jason nodded, but he didn't say anything at first. He simply let her speak, giving her the space to share what she needed to. Caressa could feel the weight of his silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as though he was patiently waiting for her to find the words she needed to say. "I've been taught that emotions are a weakness," Caressa continued, her voice low, "that they make us vulnerable. And I've always believed that. But when you spoke to me, when you said that I was beautiful, I didn't know how to react. I didn't know how to feel. Because I've never been told that before.
No one has ever said anything like that to me. Jason's expression softened, and he reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder in a gesture that was both comforting and reassuring. You don't need to hide, he said softly.
You don't need to be afraid of your feelings. They don't make you weak.
They make you human. Carissa felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to his words. Human. That word, so simple and so familiar, felt like a key unlocking something deep inside her. She had never thought of herself as human, not truly. She had always been an outsider, a stranger in a world that didn't understand her. But here, with Jason, in this moment, she was starting to realize that maybe she wasn't so different after all. I don't know how to be human, she whispered, her voice shaky. I don't know how to feel what I'm feeling. Jason's hand remained on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady.
It's okay, he said gently. You don't need to know everything right now. All you need to do is take one step at a time, and I'll be here with you.
We'll figure it out together. She wasn't used to this kind of support, this kind of understanding. It was as though Jason saw her for who she truly was, not as a warrior or a weapon, but as a person. And for the first time in her life, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could let herself be seen. For the rest of the afternoon, they sat together in silence, the peacefulness of the moment wrapping around them like a protective shield. Carissa didn't know what the future held, or where her journey would take her, but in this moment, she allowed herself to feel something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Hope. The days following their conversation by the fire were some of the most confusing of Carissa's life. She couldn't stop thinking about Jason and his words. We'll figure it out together. It was a promise, though neither of them had said it aloud. It was something that Carissa had never experienced before. Someone offering their help without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. The realization that Jason truly cared about her and that she could care about him in return was both terrifying and comforting at the same time. For so long, Carissa had been taught to suppress her emotions, to focus solely on her mission. But now, with Jason, everything seemed different. She had always believed that emotions were a weakness. Her people, the Viewership, had shown her that only strength mattered. But Jason had shown her something else. A different kind of strength, one that came from connection, from caring for others, from allowing yourself to be vulnerable. She had spent so much time hiding behind the walls she had built, so much time convincing herself that she didn't need anyone. But now, with Jason's unwavering kindness, those walls were slowly crumbling. She didn't know how to stop it. She didn't know how to stop herself from wanting to be close to him, from wanting to understand the world through his eyes. But there was still a part of her that hesitated. A part of her that was afraid of what this connection meant. She was not human. She was not like them. She had come to this planet as an observer, a spy, and the very thought of letting go of her mission made her feel as though she was betraying something important. She didn't know how to reconcile the two sides of herself, the warrior who had been trained to fight for her people, and the woman who felt something deep inside her every time she saw Jason's smile. One evening, as the sun began to set, Carissa found herself alone again, walking near the outskirts of the camp. The quiet stillness of the night seemed to call to her, urging her to find some peace. She had been spending more and more time away from the others, lost in her own thoughts. She needed time to think, to figure out what she wanted, what she needed. It wasn't just about Jason anymore. It was about herself. She had spent so long living for her people, living according to their rules, their expectations. But now, she was faced with a question that had never occurred to her before. What did she want for herself? As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her, soft and steady. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. It was Jason. She felt her heart quicken, a mixture of nervousness and something else she couldn't quite name. "Carissa," Jason called softly, his voice full of warmth. She turned to face him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Jason," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood a few paces away, his hands in his pockets, his expression serious but kind. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Is everything okay?" She wanted to tell him everything, to explain the confusion swirling inside her, the uncertainty, the fear. But she didn't know how to put it into words. She wasn't even sure she understood it herself. Instead, she just nodded.
"I've been thinking,"
she said slowly, her gaze dropping to the ground. "About what you said. About being human. And I'm not sure I know what that means." "I don't know how to be human." Jason took a step closer, his expression softening. "It's not something you have to figure out all at once. Being human isn't about having all the answers. It's about feeling. It's about connection. It's about being yourself, even when it's hard."
Irissa felt a lump form in her throat at his words.
She had never thought of it that way. She had always been so focused on being strong, on being perfect, on living up to the expectations of her people. But maybe Jason was right. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about learning to embrace the imperfections, the flaws, the parts of herself that she had always hidden. "I don't know if I can let go of everything," Caressa admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I can stop being what I was trained to be." Jason reached out then, placing his hand on her arm in a gesture of reassurance. "You don't have to let go of everything. You don't have to stop being who you are. You just have to be open to something new. You don't have to be a warrior all the time. You can be more than that. You can be yourself." Caressa looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. His words were like a balm to the wound she hadn't even realized was there. For so long she had believed that she was defined by her scars, by her training, by the mission she had been given. But now, with Jason's gentle encouragement, she began to see that maybe she could be more than just a weapon. Maybe, just maybe, she could be something else. "I don't know how to trust anyone," Caressa whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can trust myself." Jason's grip on her arm tightened slightly, but it wasn't to hold her in place. It was to give her strength, to reassure her. "It's okay to not have all the answers. You don't have to know everything right now. You just have to take it one step at a time." Caressa closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him, to trust herself, but it was hard. Her whole life had been built around a strict set of rules, and now those rules felt like a prison. She didn't know how to escape from them. "Jason," she said softly, looking up at him, her eyes searching his.
What if I'm not who you think I am? What if I can't be what you want me to be? Jason smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile.
"I don't want you to be anyone else," he said. "I just want you to be you. No expectations, no pressure, just you." Caressa felt something shift inside her at his words. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was allowed to exist, to be who she was without having to conform to anyone else's idea of who she should be. The weight that had been pressing down on her chest for so long seemed to lift, just a little. "I think I'm starting to understand," Caressa said quietly. "Maybe it's okay to be just me." Jason nodded, his expression softening. "You're already more than enough, Caressa." The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to fade into the background as Caressa allowed herself to feel something she had never felt before. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than what she had been trained to be. Hope that she could be human, in her own way, with all her imperfections, with all her scars. And as the night stretched on, Caressa and Jason stood together, the silence between them not uncomfortable but full of understanding, of connection. It was the beginning of something new, something that Caressa couldn't quite define yet, but she knew it was the first step toward discovering who she truly was. For the first time in her life, Caressa didn't feel alone.